Well, thanks very much indeed. Welcome to the show. I am Jim Ferguson. I'm delighted to welcome two great Canadian patriots all the way from Canada, Dean Allison and Shawn Buckley. Gentlemen, it's really an honour for me to have you both on the show with me. Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim. It's just a pleasure.
Well, I assure you the pleasure's mine. Now, because you're first-time guests on the show, I would be very grateful if you would both introduce yourself. We'll maybe start with yourself, Shawn. Just say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and generally speaking, where you're located.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a constitutional lawyer. I've been practicing for 31 years. And most of my career, I refer to it as resisting the machine, but in the area of protecting our access to natural health products, or dietary supplements. We're in a complete pharmaceutical drug model. And so I represent companies and practitioners when our government is trying to shut them down for helping people. And then also when COVID hit, I was on the ground floor, and my wife Teresa and I were the lead organizers of the National Citizens Inquiry. And as lead counsel, I called over half of the witnesses personally that were called at that inquiry. I'm also president of what's called the Natural Health Product Protection Association, which is kind of a citizen watchdog to protect our health rights. So it's in connection with that I had the honor to meet Dean. We were in Ottawa for something connected to that. So and now I'm involved with the Allison Inquiry, helping to set that up. So.
Great. I have to say I've got huge respect for the Canadians. We took our inspiration in terms of Freedom Train International being an international freedom movement from the Freedom Convoy. And I was very pleased and honoured to have been invited over there. I was in Ottawa, marched down Parliament Hill, met all of the respective leaders there. So you guys led the way in terms of the world, and we'll come on to some of that shortly. But maybe, Dean, if we can maybe go on to yourself as well and just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're located, what you do.
Sure. I was elected in 2004, and I've been elected 8 times. So I've been just celebrated my 22-year anniversary. I'm a member of Parliament in Ontario. As a matter of fact, most people would get the reference of Niagara Falls. I'm about a half an hour from Niagara Falls, and my riding's, partly rural, mostly rural, but, I'm close enough to cities. And as I said, I've been a Conservative member of Parliament for those 22 years. Chaired a bunch of committees. I've chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm presently chairing a committee on special projects or major projects in our country that our Liberal government set up to try and get resource projects going. You don't need to ask me about that. It's not really going, but we're a committee that is also joint with the Senate that's reporting back to Parliament on how their progress is going. So that's what I'm doing currently right now. And as I said, I got a chance to meet Shawn when he came to Ottawa back in October. And so we sort of had a chance to have some discussions about what may happen. COVID never sat well with me for a lot of reasons. And we could talk about all 100 of them. But as a member of Parliament, as you're well aware, Jim, what we do is we listen to people and we'll help advocate for them on behalf of government programs. That's what we do. That's our job, full stop. And, there's a bunch of other things that we also do that, keep us busy. But the reality is our most important individuals are our constituents, right? So if I can listen to people's stories privately about injury, about concerns, about lockdowns, all these kinds of things, and I can advocate on behalf of them for government programs, whether it be a vaccine injury program, which of course we want to talk about as well, then why can't I do that publicly? And so, we got a creeping amount of censorship in our country, much like you've experienced in your country already, and I see happening throughout the European Union. And it's that censorship that puts a chill on talking about topics that government doesn't want you to talk about. And so what we found, and what Shawn has found, and what I found, is that we can only talk about certain things, and other things we're not allowed to talk about. So why is it that I can talk and I can relate to my constituents in the privacy of my office about their injuries and their lack of ability to access government programs, but when I say and I suggest that we should talk about these things publicly, we are, sort of frowned upon, or we think it's a difficult topic, or it's not encouraged, or whatever term you want to use. And so I think one of the goals of what Shawn and I would like to accomplish is to give people permission to tell their stories publicly. And that's really all that we're doing during our inquiry. And we'll answer more questions on the exact inquiry. But really what we want to do is hear people's stories and give them permission to be able to talk amongst their family and their friends and their colleagues, to acknowledge that something happened that the government doesn't want you to talk about. And I think if we could do that, if we could get people talking, if we could get people having conversations, I think that, what we will have done will be a success.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fantastic that sitting members of Parliament included would be willing to take that approach. You're absolutely right, Dean. I mean, I have to say that I think it's the right direction to take it in. And I would just say that, the last time I was in Canada, I drove down in convoy to Niagara Falls to the Rainbow Bridge, and there was a big delegation of American patriots came up. We were there carrying the Canadian flags. I was very honored to be in part. I was actually asked to speak on the bridge as well. It was very, very patriotic. It was nice to see Americans and Canadians coming together as a non-Canadian, as a non-American, to see that spirit come together in such a powerful way. So let's go into this in some detail then, because you've raised some very, very important points, gentlemen. Hate speech laws in Canada are indeed, as Dean has said, causing a chilling effect. But, let's look at the inquiry, for example. What motivated you, Shawn, for example, to build this up and to take this forward? And now, obviously, getting support from sitting members of Parliament. I mean, that's a big undertaking that you've taken on. But what motivated you to do it?
Well, I mean, my primary motivation for all of this is as far as the COVID-19, what we call vaccines, is we're still in Canada jabbing children starting at 6 months of age. And in my opinion, that is culpable homicide or, at best, criminal negligence. And because these people aren't at risk at all. So my big motivation is let's stop harming people. But in Canada, there are so many people that are harmed by this vaccine. We're in a health crisis. And, I think we're just now starting at the leading edge of cancer diagnoses going off the chart. But let's just ignore even cancer. There's just so many people that are injured, and they're not being treated properly because we cannot accept in Canada that the vaccines caused injury, because the official narrative is that they are safe and effective. And the official narrative is all of this harm is caused by long COVID. And we've got this group of people in Canada, kind of this middle ground, that believe that because that's what the messaging has been. And that messaging is not correct. I don't want to go into the causes of long COVID and that, but the reality is we have a significant number of Canadians that are injured by the vaccine, but we can't admit it yet. I was on a podcast last week with a medical doctor, a Canadian medical doctor, and I said, is it possible, in July of 2026 for a Canadian doctor to speak out publicly against the COVID-19 vaccine, say it caused harm, and, we should look into this and start addressing actually the real mechanisms of harm. And this doctor said, no, you'd be professionally disciplined and may lose your right to practice. So these people are suffering, Jim, and they're being denied medical treatments because in Canada, we have this, we've come to believe that everything needs to be scarce and that the next generation needs to be poor and that we can wait in line, 18 hours in emergency wards, and we can be denied treatments because those treatments aren't approved for any vaccine injury or anything like that. These people are being denied treatments. And in my mind, that's an ethical problem. These aren't anti-vaxxers. These are people, like if you want to be in that crowd where you want to throw that label that somehow is worse than, being called a leper. These are people that took the vaccine, many not wanting to, but, because they were told to, and they're injured. And how dare we not then, first of all, listen to their stories and acknowledge they're injured, but secondly, take care of them.
I think any society that turns their back on the most vulnerable raises very, very serious moral questions, as well as others, about the direction of travel. And I think you're right. we must talk about these things. And a lot of people, they were coerced into it. They were duped into it. I'm going to ask you, before I move on to Dean for a second, because I'm always interested, why is it that some people went along with the narrative and others chose not to, despite the fact that they were persecuted, they were sort of, even family members were being ostracized in certain circumstances, but employers, others saying this is something you had to do. But before I go to Dean, let me ask you the question, Shawn. At what point did you know there was something not right? When did the red flags go up for you? When did you see that there was something just not right about this?
You know, and I'll just preface it to say, when COVID hit, I mean, I was already hardwired from past experience not to believe Health Canada, because I'm fighting them all the time. I'm seeing that there's an agenda to basically keep us in chronic illness. So I didn't have any trust anyway. And I also understood that there's two Canadas, much like there'll be, you know, two United Kingdoms. You know, one where just the average citizen lives, and if you're not crossing that line where you become a danger to the establishment, you don't get that treatment. But I was involved in a federal court case where if we succeeded, and we're just seeking a declaration saying as a constitutional minimum, surely when you take medications that people need to survive, like there's no question they're going to die without it, and it's being shipped through the mail, when you seize that, surely as a bare minimum, you should advise them you've stolen medication that they will die without. But if we had won that because of the fact pattern, it would be very clear that some very high up people within Health Canada, including a former minister in the government, most probably committed culpable homicide and or criminal negligence causing death. And that's when the telephone started getting, you know, tapped right where they're breaking in and say, hang on, I got to change the tape, and my office is being broken into, and my house is being broken into, and my phone and the car across the street and the lug nuts being loosened on your wheels. You have to check them before you are going to go on the highway. I'd already had those experiences, as had other lawyers. When you cross that Rubicon, there's a certain line you're not supposed to cross, and they let you know that you've crossed it and please back off. So I was already hardwired. But for me during COVID, you know, the first little bit where the wife and I are watching the news, and I don't know, I think it was the beginning of the third week in, the news starts talking about vaccine. Well, I'm in the drug approval world. The pharmaceutical companies have been trying for decades to get a coronavirus vaccine approved, because then you'd have public health agencies in all Western nations paying for two vaccines, not just one, an influenza strain and a corona strain. It's a license to print money, but they could never get through the animal studies because, you know, generally speaking, 100% of the animals die. So I knew right then it was a fraud. And then, you know, once you start looking, it was astounding. I mean, Jim, I know you know all about this, but I mean, it's truly, you look back and it's almost unbelievable what happened and how the whole world fell into lockstep.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I picked up on a lot of these signals. It was a psychological operation. They used fear very successfully to coerce people into doing things that they ordinarily would not have done. Dean, let me come to you then, because, you know, you're a member of Parliament. Cast your mind back. When did you start to see things starting to happen? And did you get pressure? I mean, if you spoke out about those sort of situations or raised any concerns, did you get pressure from within the establishment itself as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I remember when all this was going on within our party, lockdowns, for example. Let's just take lockdowns. I'm a small business person. Lockdowns are deadly for small business people, right? You know, how are you going to get people out to your restaurant, your small business, your store, your retail, whatever? And so I really had a problem with it. And our leadership at the time said, you know, that's really a provincial issue. You always know you're in trouble, you know, when politicians start pointing at other levels of government, right? So I kind of think all these are my constituents, right? Whether they don't care if it's, you know, people call me about my garbage. Their garbage not being picked up. That's a local issue, municipal. They don't care. They want to hear from the elected people to go to bat for them. So there was pressure right from the start. And, and my thought process was always, hey, people should have choice. People should never be not allowed to participate in society. And, I had kids calling my office crying. I'm in third year nursing and I can't continue with my program, which means I can't continue with my career. And what am I going to do? And I'm going to have to throw out all that time. What am I going to do to pivot? And I had 55, 60-year-old truck drivers that are saying, like, I need to do this. And I've had allergic reactions. I mean, I knew that this was cocoa bananas when they wouldn't even recognize exemptions. Like people that had actually had adverse reactions to other vaccines. They said, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do it for religious reasons. There is absolutely zero chances that we can do anything. So imagine the amount of calls I was taking from small business people, from single mothers during lockdowns in 500 square foot apartments. I don't know what that is in meters, square meter, maybe 200, whatever. Small apartments, 1-bedroom apartments, who were not allowed to take their kids across the street to a park and be outside. That's insanity. So you look at the plethora of stupid rules, and I've never trusted government to begin with, even before I got into it. And I realize there are some good people in there, but government that says they always have your best interest at heart. Over 22 years, you can't convince me that happens in every case. So maybe just, maybe just once in a while, they don't have your interest at heart. And the reality is that I always ask the question. The other thing I always ask is people is to follow the money. I just follow the money. Where's the money coming from and who's getting rich off of this? And then you'll start, asking better questions as far as that goes. So, really to me, the challenge was, I wanted to say more. I was upset by the fact that things did not add up. And very quickly we saw this will cause you to not be able to get it. You won't give it. Like you're protected. You're protected from other people. Well, once again, the whole thought process around a vaccine was that it's there to protect myself, right? So the narrative kept changing. So if anyone that was a critical thinker could actually try and follow the bouncing ball, you would realize very quickly that this was a challenge. And yes, always political pressure. You've been around politics. You know that the parties, have an apparatus, and there's always saying we got to speak, with united front, and we got to make sure. I just always, as an entrepreneur, I've always questioned everything, right? I question things because that's what you do as an entrepreneur. That say, like, what do you mean it can't be done better? It can't be done differently. What do you mean it's never been done before? So these are just part of the questions of my lexicon that I like to ask anyways, regardless of whether it's politics or not.
It's interesting because, I often speak to people who are former military or intelligence or police and business, and we all speak a very similar language. We don't have the luxury of debates in infinitum. I mean, we have to get on. We have to, turn things around very, very quickly. And I find that most people that had an early instinct that there was something not right, usually I've come from those kind of environments. But when you hear a respected lawyer like Shawn saying, hey, you get warnings to toe the line, to turn it down, the lug nuts on your wheels get loosened. It's like they're sending a signal. I mean, where are we going with this when you hear that, Dean? I mean, that is pretty shocking stuff.
Yeah, and so listen, ever since Trudeau came in, which was an unmitigated disaster. Like he was a clown before he got elected. He was a clown and he continues not to disappoint on the clown front. This guy had not a clue what was going on and not a serious person by it all. Ever since COVID, and I think it's the same all around the world, Jim. Ever since COVID, the overreach, the censorship, the everything that goes into. We're not here to talk about digital IDs today. We're talking about legislation that is put before the Houses of Parliament all over the world, with increasing censorship, with increasing what I say setting the cage in terms of what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Why is it that we're not allowed to challenge government? Why is it that we're not? Listen, every one of this call does not support hate speech. Absolutely. I mean, that's a given. And we already have laws around hate speech. But when you take some of these decisions, out of the hands of, the legal, judges and what have you, and then start appointing ad hoc boards and ad hoc committees that now can make those decisions. And when you see, different countries spend more time censoring, you hurt my feeling memes as opposed to dealing with real crime, you start to ask questions about where are we going and where are we heading. And so the narrative was set in COVID. You will comply, you will listen, and you will not challenge the government. And I have seen literally dozens of pieces of legislation that have been introduced, with Trudeau 1, second term of Trudeau. And then as we continue to move on with our new guy, Carney, I mean, you guys have had the benefit of having Carney. You guys know more about him than Canadians. This guy hasn't even lived in the country for the last number of years. He's got 3 passports. It's crazy. And so he's just continued along the censorship front. So going back to what was discussed before, the challenge is when you can't raise questions, when you can't challenge the government. I don't care who it is. We're in the opposition right now. It's our duty to hold the government to account. We're doing our job. That's what we're supposed to do. But when you see increasing legislation, that it revolves around censorship, that is a bad place to be in a country and a society when you cannot discuss, pick your topic, A, B, or C. And so this is why, for me, after hearing people's stories during COVID and the challenge they had to meet, either to continue with their education or to put food on their table, or to be able to see dying parents in a hospital. These choices were unconscionable in terms of what they were doing to people, putting a gun to their head. And so as Shawn has said, whether you took the vaccine voluntarily or whether you did it where you were coerced and in some cases threatened, it doesn't matter. These people have stories. Not everyone was injured to the same effect. Not everyone had to deal with the same type of trauma or the same type of injury. But if you were injured, should the government, and not at the very least, be willing to listen to your story and hear what you have to say instead of marginalizing you and calling you all kinds of names and saying that you don't matter? These people did what they thought they were required to do in order to participate in society. And the fact that we have not given them the time of day, it irks me beyond that. And I'm hearing these stories from all across the country. I'm hearing them in my emails, voicemails, letters. You pick your topic of the way you want to communicate. And I think it's time, and I think it's well overdue that we get a chance to listen to some of their stories.
I've interviewed many people from Canada and other places around the world who were COVID vaccine injured, no question of it. I've spoken to many professors, epidemiologists, virologists, doctors, people of renown who are saying, look, there is something seriously very wrong with the whole thing. I did look at the 1918 Spanish flu many, many years ago. I studied what had happened there and had a natural interest in it. But the lockdowns were devastating for businesses. I mean, all in. And a lot of people made a lot of money out of it. But Shawn, it's coming back to yourself for a moment. If they're so sure of themselves and it being so safe and effective, you would think that they would be able to counter the opposite views or the opposite narrative if they're so sure about their own position on it. But they don't appear to be and haven't been for some time. But instead, what they're doing is they're imposing legislation or putting legislation together that actually closes down that debate. How complicit, Shawn, are they in the media in Canada right now as far as that's all concerned?
Well, I mean, Jim, none of this could happen without the media. And so your viewers in the United Kingdom understand it's likely that the Canadian media is the most controlled and most homogeneous in having the government message. So one of our major broadcasters, the CBC, it's a government broadcaster. And, the irony is a lot of Canadians totally trust them because in the past, they built trust by actually mimicking journalism. And it might have been true journalism, but we also fund the other major networks. So it's, I don't know the numbers, but it's very possible that the Canadian government is the largest contributor to the other major networks, and then add in pharmaceutical advertising. And, we can go back to, manufacturing consent by Noam Chomsky. the media is reasonably affected, and editorial boards are reasonably affected by those that are funding them. And there are well-known mechanisms for this, but it's so gotten out of hand. But they have a narrative problem, Jim. They have a huge narrative problem. And here's why we have to have the discussion in Canada. It's why you have to have the discussion in the UK. It's why every country does. You know, in September of 2025, Rasmussen did a poll in the United States that found that 56.6% of Americans believe that the COVID-19 vaccines caused, listen to the qualifier here, serious death. So not death, not, do you know somebody, did your Aunt Martha know somebody who knows somebody that died? We have over half of Americans back in September, which, you know, now in our time frame is a lot of time because we've got all of these injuries growing, that believe the COVID-19's caused serious harm. We don't have such a survey in Canada, and I'm assuming, though, the numbers are very similar. Well, what's the percentage of Canadians, of Americans, of people in the United Kingdom that not only believe that the vaccines cause serious death, but also believed it caused serious injury? It's you know, it's well over half. Well, how do you restore trust in public health? I mean, you've got a subset of this population believing that this was a deliberate thing, or in the very least, you know, bordering on criminal recklessness on how things happened. And I mean, the reality is that we all live in a bubble, so we can think different things. But you've got well over half of the populace that believes that there was injury caused and death caused by an intervention that was completely promoted and shoved down our throats by our governments. Well, you can't restore public health until we have this conversation. So, I mean, leaving aside that ethically, what we're doing is completely morally wrong. We are terrorizing and allowing to suffer and die. And in Canada, we pushed assisted suicide. It might now be our leading cause of death. No one knows, because doctors can't even, you know, in our largest province, will get disciplined if they even put that as a cause of death on the death certificate. But we've got people dying, we've got people suffering, we're not taking care of them. And back to the mainstream media, is none of this could happen without the mainstream media. And the pushback to Dean has, you know, just been vicious. You know, how dare you promote vaccine hesitancy, and, you know, where were you when I was saving lives in the emergency ward, etc. Well, there's already vaccine hesitancy. You know, we had a blood scandal in Canada where our blood supply years ago was not being screened properly, and people were getting things like hepatitis C and other conditions. And we refused to have the conversation. And so we had, basically the whole nation became unwilling to receive blood, and I think even donate blood. And until we had that conversation and they said, oh yes, actually we have a problem, and then we fixed the problem, we couldn't restore confidence. Well, that's where we are with these COVID-19 vaccines. We have to have an honest conversation, figure out together, you know, what happened, fix the mistakes, and then go on. And until that happens, we're going to be hopelessly divided.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. I remember when I first heard about the MAID service. This is assisted suicide. Shocked me. People that were injured through the vaccine being offered this instead of it, you know, traditional support, financial support, whatever it might be. No, they were offered assisted suicide. I find the whole thing quite stomach churning. And military veterans that were injured as well, a lot of them were once again offered this MAID service. To the point where we've been having debates in Parliament here in the United Kingdom about the same type of thing. And I know that Australia have been having that conversations there in their government too. So, you know, it is shocking. And I am very much against it, because I can see all sorts of reasons why that is the wrong path to go down. If I could come to you then, Dean, as a sitting member of Parliament, what's your view on MAID? Why do you think it was passed the way it was? Do you think there's any possibility that a Conservative government might revoke some of that legislation or just do away with it altogether?
Well, definitely. And as a matter of fact, a number of our members, conservative members of parliament, have actually introduced private members' bills. Our concern was always, it started as an irrefutable and eminent, right? So you had an incurable disease, and the death was going to be around the corner. And there's some reasoning to say maybe that's humane, and that's probably an acceptable level. But the challenge was that we were always concerned about the guardrails, and that we just continue to expand it. It's been out of control. I mean, we've gone from that, and then we continue, and even the process, it was like 2 weeks to think about it, 2 doctors, and now we're down to, one doctor and, 24 hours. The guardrails continue. And so the challenge is, as you mentioned, we have veterans that show up that are dealing with poverty issues. So not even talking about injuries. We're talking about people that fought, bled, and were injured for our country. And they show up to say, we need help financially, and they're offered They're offered medical assistance in dying. Think about that for 1 second. What kind of society goes to a go-to point of, we will just offer you an easy way out, and we'll save our health care, which they totally mismanaged as well. That's a conversation for another day. And so we've always wanted to bring things back and limit it. They're talking about mental illness. They're talking about, reducing the age. So, what I find very difficult is what happens to those who are most vulnerable. So our seniors in nursing homes. How about our disabled in group homes? How about our teens that struggle with a plethora of mental health challenges? I mean, as we were all teenagers once, things were not always rosy. We struggled with, this, that, or the other thing. And we realized in time, oh, you know what, this too will pass. And so the last thing you want to do is when someone's vulnerable and struggling, to offer them something like this. And so we would most definitely roll back some of these things around MAID. I think, we've had over 100,000 people that have used this already. Shawn indicated it's one of the leading. It's not the leading cause of death, but it's growing. And as a percentage, we're doing far worse. And even places like Holland, the Netherlands, that have a pretty liberal policy around physician-assisted in dying, or like I said, we call it MAID because it's called different names everywhere. California, which is a lefty state and very, progressive on some of these issues, we're actually outpacing them as well. So when we look at these kinds of things, we realize this is not good. There was a paper that was done, a research paper, a number of months ago that came out and showed that, potentially as we lead into post 2035, post 2037, the savings to the healthcare system. So once again, follow the money. Follow the money could be in the trillions of dollars. And so if you think about offering people MAID for any reason, and I think it's unconscionable that people that have been injured through no fault of their own from vaccines are being offered this as a solution for a system that was supposed to take care of them, and they were only doing what they thought was the right thing to do. So, if you start to connect all the dots, which is, I know what certainly what I look at, it's the money thing, it's a failing healthcare system and a whole plethora of issues. Maybe it's not one in particular, but when you add them all up, you see why they're doing what they're doing and trying to save money on the backs of Canadians or wherever this is offered around the world. And I think that is reprehensible.
Absolutely agree. When I was last in Canada, actually, it wasn't the last time. One of the times I went to Ottawa. I met a fellow called Eddie Cornell. It's a great Canadian patriot. He was one of the founders for Veterans for Freedom Canada. And I started working with him and his colleagues and drawing awareness to a lot of the things that were going on with the vaccine injured, in particular, those who were military veterans. In fact, one of the highest honors I've ever received was to be made an honorary member of Veterans for Freedom Canada. And, got a lovely letter from Eddie and his colleagues, and they're doing some amazing work. If you haven't linked up with Eddie Cornell, I would highly recommend it because he's a very, very smart guy and really knows what he's talking about. But I want to ask you, if I can back to Shawn just for a moment. First of all, before I ask you this question, let me tell you something. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but people in the UK are. When we had our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak installed, because he was never voted in. He was installed after a lot of strange activity going on there. And it turned out that a Guardian newspaper investigative journalist had found out that back in 2017, he had invested $500 million. That's $500 million of his own personal fortune. He's a very wealthy guy, Richie Sunak, into none other than Moderna, who up until that point had never had a successful product to market. This is back in 2017. And then he was questioned about it. Obviously when the pandemic struck, he said, "Oh, it was just good luck on my part." Well, who'd invest $500 million into a company that's never had any successful products to market to that extent? I don't know. Let me ask you first of all, Shawn, were you aware of that? Did you know about that?
No, no, I had no idea. And it's kind of curious you're saying that. And I don't know if it's true, but I recall that there were allegations going around that Justin Trudeau had also invested in Moderna. I could be completely wrong with that, or had somehow been involved in that that process in a financial way. But no, that's a shocking conflict of interest, isn't it? There's simply no way, unless he knew something.
Right. And I think this is what caught a lot of people's attention. I mean, Dean, $500 million into a company that's never had a successful product to market, and then to compound it further, when he did become Prime Minister, he allowed Moderna to set up contracts within the United Kingdom worth billions, and of course would have made a great deal of money off the back of his investment in that as well. And by the way, this was set up in the Cayman Islands through a shell company that he helped create called Theleme Partners. So there was a lot. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Guardian newspaper, but in this case, they deserve a bit of praise, because that journalist, that investigative reporter, exposed something that I think goes right to the heart of what we witnessed over that whole COVID era. And maybe I'll just come back to you just very briefly, Dean. I mean, had you heard about Richie Sunak, the former British Prime Minister, having made that kind of investment? Is that something you heard about in Canada?
I've heard of some over the time. Like, you read the stories at the time. He almost sounds like he's had the kind of luck that Nancy Pelosi has had in the States with her investment portfolio. It's incredible that some of these politicians that have insider information and are unable to trade on it. It just blows me away that this actually happens in the United States, and that not only do they outpace the market, they outpace any of the top performing fund managers as well. Once again, Jim, I always tell people, follow the money. Find out where people are going, what they're doing. And, can you imagine, if he was worth $1 billion, like I said, I was aware that he was a wealthy individual, et cetera, at the time. But, can you imagine putting that kind of bet, on anything? You would have to be pretty sure. So I would say I would take it one step further and say that's not only incredibly great luck. He should give up politics. Well, I know he's not involved anymore, and just go into fund management, because to put that amount of money on one particular stock, I don't think lucky even begins to describe what that is.
Yeah, and several years before. Of course you can.
Yeah, many years before, right?
I'm just, the word accountability is screaming at me. So how is it possible? Because you're describing something that happens in Canada also. We could talk about engineering firms and our Prime Minister and the like. But Jim, how is it that, Britain spawned a bunch of what we call Western liberal democracies. And in every single one of them, and in Britain itself, there's no accountability. How is it possible that a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom could have a financial interest in a company that then is profiting during, what we're told is this big crisis, and not be able to have to step down, or at least be 100% insulated, which would require it being outside of Cabinet's purview to be making these decisions? And there's never any accountability. There's never any investigation. And we could go on. And it's why we have rot in our institutions. If we listen, you get into office now, you can act criminally. That you can have glaring conflicts of interest. And you will profit by it because our justice system will not investigate you. You will, our parliaments will not kick you out and censure you. You basically have a free ride. Now, the reason that is because the citizens are tolerating it. And this is part of a wider problem. If I can just go religious on you, but I feel I have to, is the United Kingdom was founded on Christian principles. Canada was founded on Christian principles, and that required honesty, and it required personal accountability of every member of society, not just our leaders. And we stepped away from that. And we have to get back to that, because society collapses when we get into this moral relativism where it's okay for a prime minister to be profiting, incredible amounts during a pandemic, when their government is basically probably censoring any information for alternative treatments, and everyone's being railroaded into this. I mean, it's outrageous. We're talking about MAID when the Supreme Court of Canada allowed that. And there had been attempts before with really egregious fact patterns where, your heart's bleeding for the person, and the court says, no, we can't allow this. We've got this sanctity of life, which was a Christian principle that was embedded in our legal system, that it was a line you couldn't cross. And when they finally said in another hard luck case, yeah, we'll allow this, the legal community thought we might have 2 a year. And the real problem is this is just a symptom of us abandoning hard and fast principles such as the sanctity of life, which doesn't allow this. Because as soon as we abolish these principles, we go into awful places. And the other thing, and I invite anyone in your audience to share with me how we murder people in Canada with, government-assisted suicide. Because I just thought when we allowed it that we just give them a morphine overdose. If somebody's in their last hour or something in a hospice, we all kind of know that they might be given a little too much morphine to kind of help that process along. And I thought that's what we were doing because it's cheap and they're not going to suffer. They're just going to go to sleep and their respiration is going to stop. No, what we do is we give you a drug that paralyzes you. So you can't do anything. You can't blink. You can't speak. And then we give you a drug where it causes you to drown in your lungs. So your lungs fill up with fluid. And the question I have for your audience, because I don't know the answer and no one can tell me the answer in Canada, is, are some of us aware when this is happening? Like we're paralyzed, but are we aware that we're slowly drowning?
I mean, it's a nightmare. I'm not a medical professional, but I have spoken to people that say it's incredibly painful as well. Yet, as you say, the people are paralyzed. They can't speak, they can't move, they can't do anything. What a dreadful, dreadful way to go. What kind of government would sanction that kind of process? And not just sanction it, but actively encourage it. I mean, let me come to you, Dean, for 1 second, because one of the times that I was speaking to Canadians about this, at that point, they were talking about passing legislation that would have allowed the maid service to be given to young people or even children. Do you know if that passed, or is that still on the cards to be voted on? And what's your thoughts on that?
So, completely unacceptable, right? And I could get into a whole bunch of other topics that I won't, that I could get in trouble on when it deals with how and what we allow young people to do. So, I think that first off, young people should be protected at all costs. They don't understand the consequences. They're at a period of time where they think that nothing can ever get better. So they don't understand the context, that life is full of ups and downs. And let's be honest, the last number of years, we put our kids in a bubble and we bubble wrap them and we give them participation trophies, and things are different than when my parents grew up and my parents came, like most people in Canada came from Western Europe. My people that came from Ireland and England and Scotland, like all these places, 200 years ago. And they weren't put on some kind of welfare program. And now governments put everyone on welfare program. They came to contribute. They were given land. They worked it so hard, et cetera, et cetera. So this is completely unacceptable. We're trying to, there has been some discussion about trying to roll back some of the things. But right now we've gone way too far. And and by the way, any discussion we have to even hold the line is not good enough. We need to roll it back even further. Kids are not in a position to make any kind of decisions around things that will affect the rest of their life. In this case, would end their life. And I think that, what we have to get back to is the fact that, we talk about personal responsibility, and I know we're not on the show to talk about personal responsibility, but whatever happened, right? Our countries were founded on Judeo-Christian principles, right? And part of that is personal responsibility. And so there are a number of things that we need to do. And I think, when we start looking at passing laws to try and fix problems that we've created, maybe we should take a step back and figure out, what I'm always worried about when we pass legislation is the law of unintended consequences. How many times do you see governments around the world pass one piece of legislation that is supposed to affect one issue and has got a catastrophic effect on something else that they didn't even consider? And so I think that's the point. I take the approach that we should try to do no harm, although that's not what we're dealing with a lot of times when it comes to legislation. I think that's the challenge, right? That we've got to do a better job on those things. We've got to defend the people that need to be defended. We have got to be a voice for the voiceless. That is why Shawn and I are undertaking this. These people do not have a voice. They don't have a voice, and they've been even made to feel guilty and ostracized and put away and said, no, you shouldn't talk about it. You should suck it up. And by the way, if it gets too bad, we'll offer you assistance in dying, right? MAID is what we call it in Canada. And even we changed the name to make it sound better, more pleasant, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's so important that we give these people a voice. Their voices need to be heard. And we really believe if we can give these people that have been vaccine injured a voice, then that we can begin to start the healing process, not only in their lives, but in maybe their families' lives, maybe the community, but certainly in this country. As has been said, we don't trust institutions like we should. And, there was a time and place where they were created. I know why they've been created, is to be able to do the right thing, but that is not the case anymore. And quite frankly, we need to make sure that people can heal from what's happened. And part of that is being able to talk about these things publicly.
Absolutely right. We are approaching, this has gone past all too quickly. I have a big interest in Canada. I've been there many times. I know great people there. And I have to say, I'm delighted to have you both on. But there is something that I'd like to ask you that isn't so much COVID related, but it is to do with Alberta, the province of Alberta. There is talk about the potential for them to potentially declare independence, or at least to have a democratic vote on separation. Maybe I'll start with yourself, Shawn. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to happen? What do you think the Premier is going to do? Do you think she's going to allow it? And if they don't allow it, where does it go from there? But start with yourself first of all, Shawn.
You're muted, Shawn.
Oh. Sorry, no, Jim, I do want to talk about that, and I live in Alberta, so I've got some things to say, but I first want to just briefly talk about the Allison Inquiry so that people understand. So, you see Dean's last name, Allison, so just, do an internet search, allisoninquiry.com. So what Dean has agreed to do as an MP, and this isn't a government initiative, it's not a Conservative Party initiative, he's just decided, I'm going to formally, so it's going to happen on Parliament Hill in a committee room, and all other MPs are invited. So MPs are going to have the opportunity to formally listen to vaccine-injured persons tell their stories. Now, we're not allowed to do this. By the mainstream media and that, we're not supposed to have this conversation. And it could be the icebreaker. This has already so resonated on social media that people that believe the vaccines saved lives, that believe that all of these injuries are long COVID and don't accept, wait a second, a large part of these injuries are vaccine injured. They're now having this conversation, even if it's in disbelief, for the first time. And so this inquiry could be groundbreaking around the world, and people around the world are going to be watching it. So here in Canada on Parliament Hill, we're going to have MPs having that conversation for the first time. An honest conversation where they're interacting with vaccine-injured persons, asking them questions, listening to their stories. So I just, I wanted to make sure everyone knew, and they can go to Allison Inquiry. I'm also going to ask if your audience would help donate to support this. It's like I'm volunteering. This is being set up by volunteers, but MPs in Canada are not given a budget to do this. So we're actually having to fundraise by the public. And our major cost is flying vaccine injured witnesses and housing them. And some of them have to travel a couple of days before because they're too sick, they have to recover. So we desperately need funds to be able to get the vaccine injured persons who need to tell their stories, and the world needs to hear them. So I just wanted to say that first, because it's so important that your audience understands what member of parliament.
Just before we go on to the other part, where can people donate to? Is there like a
so if you search AllisonInquiry.com, you're actually going to get, it's going to come up as Allison Inquiry, but the web address is actually COVID testimony. We just set up a not-for-profit corporation to take funds and disperse funds. So and there's a donate page. And so, thank you for asking that question. So please just go to Allison Inquiry or, COVIDtestimony.com, and there's a donate tab and donate, because we're at the stage where we're now contacting the witnesses, and I'm having to ask them, is there any way you can cover your own travel costs? And we know that many can't. Some can and many can't, but we shouldn't even be having that conversation. Many of them are afraid to testify. Many of them fear that there's going to be consequences. All of them will suffer physically for doing this. And the fact that we can't just take care of that, I'm embarrassed, actually. So thank you for letting me get that out of the way, Jim. I think that's, this is a conversation we haven't been allowed to have in Canada. Members of Parliament have been reluctant to have the conversation, and the mainstream media has an interest in not having this conversation, in continuing the government narrative for several reasons. That's what their funders want. So the pharmaceutical company and the Canadian government, their major funders, do not want this conversation. But the risk they run is that they're like, public trust in the mainstream media is already at an all-time low. I truly hope they understand that we have to now have this conversation. Like, I'm sure they've had these conversations. How long can we kick the can down the road, hoping it will be forever? But the world needs to start listening to these stories, because if we listen to each other, even if we disagree, there's something about listening to other people share their experience, their lives, and this is going to change our lives, full stop. And maybe while we're still on that topic, I'll let Dean speak, and then I'll answer your Alberta question.
Absolutely, Dean. Truly, there is unity, strength in unity, isn't there? I mean, unity is strength. And just to add to what Shawn has said, maybe would you like to say a few words on that?
Yeah, no, like I said, the biggest challenge I've seen is that people feel alone. And, because they're not allowed to talk about it publicly, what happens is that you could have like two neighbors that have had two different experiences, but because we've not going to give them permission to talk about it publicly. Like, I'm not talking we're doing a public forum, but even like it's been frowned upon to even have these conversations. Like it's like a dirty little secret, and somehow you're to blame. What we're really hoping will happen is that people will realize that they're not alone. And they'll come out and say, you know what, I thought it was just me. I had no idea. And as Shawn has mentioned before, well, how do you think we can get healing? How do you think we could actually, I had a guy come up to me we just celebrated our 100th anniversary for our Legion, our Royal Canadian Legion, 100 years. And I had a gentleman came up to me, it was in my office, 15 years ago. And he said, Dean, I was injured and I've been to the doctor. I got joint pain and the doctor doesn't know what to do. Like they keep prescribing, they don't know how to handle it. And so part of the reason we want discussions is so that people can have conversations and then figure out, well, what may have worked for A, B, or C disease, etc., doesn't necessarily work for a vaccine injury. But if you can't have the conversation, how are you ever going to come up with a cure? Right? So we don't have a cure and we don't have conversations, which means that we'll just offer you death. Wow. That is completely unacceptable. And so I think we really want the conversation to happen, A, because we want people not to feel alone, B, because we want to see healing, but C, because we want conversation to evolve to a point where people can actually try and reduce some of the issues that they've had as a result of their injuries, that quite frankly they weren't sure because the doctors wouldn't acknowledge or even have a conversation, which further frustrates people as they try to figure out what's wrong and how can I get help.
Incredible.
Can I talk about this?
Doing.
Jim, can I just give you another example? Because the issue of neighbors came up and how we've been so divided, and it ties into censorship, because censorship divides us. We can't actually know what other people think, so then we can't understand them. So and COVID is the perfect thing. We were all UK, Canada divided, vaccinated, unvaccinated. In fact, we came to hate each other. Well, let's say you've got two neighbors, one that was I'm against the vaccine, and the other that was pro-vaccine, and they hate each other. Now, if they were actually allowed to listen to each other's story, they would come to understand they had the exact same experience. And listen carefully, they had the exact same experience. They just believed different things. And I'm totally generalizing, but the vaccine, pro-vax person could honestly say to their neighbor, I believed that there was this dangerous pathogen that actually could kill me, could kill my kids, and I'm terrified. I am terrified by this. But there's this solution, there's this vaccine. And so we could all be safe if only you would have taken it. You live right beside me, and I'm being told that I'm unsafe and my children are unsafe. Of course I'm mad at you. Of course I hate you. It's become to anger and hate. Now the unvaccinated person gets to share their story and says, during that thing, I honestly believed that the vaccine posed a mortal threat to me and my kids. Well, no problem, because in the UK and Canada, you don't have to take a treatment you don't want to take. Oh, no, wait a second. We've got the government and we've got the pro-vaxxers like you. We can't go to our kids' hockey game. We can't go to restaurants. We can't work. We can't pay our mortgage. We can't go to Christmas dinners. I mean, the social pressure, everything. I can't send my kids to school because they're going to get vaccinated, and the teachers are going to tell the kids not to tell me, the parent. So I would be safe if only it was for you, my neighbor. And of course I was scared of you. And now it became angry and hatred. Well, now they've just shared this. Can they continue to hate each other? They've had the exact same experience because we're human beings. They divide us by preventing us from actually having these conversations. And they are able to manipulate us with fear and all of that because we all react the same. We're human beings. And we have to understand we're the same. And we have to understand that, those people, how are they acting that way? Because in what they believe, that makes perfect sense. And you would act that way too. Like, we have to understand we're the same. We were all in this together. It was all traumatizing. My gosh, don't separate us with censorship. Then we can never come to understand and forgive and come together and love again. We have to share the stories. And this is, Member of Parliament Dean Anderson is stepping out here and doing what nobody in Canada has done, and said, I want members of Parliament to have the opportunity to listen to stories. And that's going to change lives.
Powerful words, Shawn. I have to say, what I'd be very keen to see is the likes of Dean to take over as Prime Minister of Canada. I think that is what would give the real leadership that's necessary. How would you feel about that, Dean? Is that something you could ever rule out, or would you consider doing it if that ever became a possibility?
No. I've seen what leaders endure and go through. Even the bad leaders are really, I tell you, what a life. Oh my goodness. I look at how hard they work. I look at how hard our current leader works right now. And I think, my goodness, there's many sacrifices made in public life. And, I've made sacrifices. We all make sacrifices, right? We work, we have jobs, we're away from our families. But I think I look at ministers, and the requirement is that much more than MPs. The prime minister, that much more than ministers. It's an incredible commitment. And I appreciate the role, and I appreciate the job and the responsibilities. We're going to leave that to other people. But I love to be supportive. Right. I'm happy to be supportive.
Well, I would just say that's the kind of answer that should signal to people in Canada that you are the right person for that particular role. Never rule things out. All right, gentlemen, we've gone a little bit over time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. But I am curious a little bit about your positions on Alberta. I know we're deviating ever so slightly.
Okay.
But we're going to get your thoughts, Shawn and Dean, about that. And then we're going to go and give you both the last and final word to say whatever you want to say. So, Shawn, you stay in Alberta. What are you hearing there? Do you think this referendum is going to happen?
Okay, so first of all, so people in the UK, and actually even people in Canada, won't understand the Alberta experience. So we're this crazy huge country. Like for me to drive to Ottawa, even like 12-hour days is probably a 4 or 5 day one-way commitment. Just so you understand the the distances involved. So Alberta has been oil rich. And we've got a couple of things that happens. So back, in the 1973 oil crisis, price of oil is shooting through the roof. Alberta's just going gangbusters. And the Trudeau government, so it was Pierre Trudeau, steps in and imposes what was called a national energy policy, saying, no, you're not selling to the rest of Canada at world prices. We're, basically controlling costs within Canada. And Alberta just tanked, like businesses went out of business overnight. The oil patch just died. And it created a lot of anger. And then over the years, we've got what's called equalization. And, I'm going to be poking some sacred cows here by asking some questions. But so the idea is, well, the federal government will pull money from those parts of Canada that are generating more income and give it to the poor parts of Canada so that there can kind of be a base level of services across the nation. Now, if you have a couple of provinces that, are not productive and they're uneconomic, if you're not interfering, then what might happen is people might go, there's actually not economic activity here. And maybe I have the choice. We have freedom of mobility. Maybe I'll move to parts of Canada, that are booming or just actually more reasonable places to live. We just ended up here by historical accident or whatever, and just let people decide. But we've decided not to do that. Well, Alberta, I don't know what the figure is, but it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that have been sucked out, mainly to the east, and it never comes back. My spouse has the experience where she was a, struggling single mom who, had to hold down several jobs and didn't have daycare. But in the province of Quebec, which is receiving most of Alberta's money, she would have daycare paid for by the government. Well, with Alberta money. Well, that goes on for decades and you kind of get angry about it, right? So, and then I think COVID was the last straw, where there was so much federal government overreach with this, that those people that viewed this as, wait a second, you are so intruding on our rights and freedoms, that it's ignited that movement again. So will there be a referendum? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. Is there a sizable number of people in Alberta that would like to separate and become a separate country? Absolutely, there are.
Interesting indeed. And the same question to yourself then, Dean, and very interested to hear your views as a sitting member of Parliament, what you think about the whole scenario of Alberta, the province of Alberta, potentially seceding from Ottawa. What's your thoughts on that?
There's a couple of things. It'll come as no surprise. I'd love them to stay. And maybe it'll come as a surprise for someone from the East, but I completely agree that their level of frustration there is because they have not been allowed to develop their God-given assets and resources. And quite frankly, we are so stupid as a country not to do that. If any country could have the kind of resources that we have, and critical minerals, oil and gas, and the list goes on and on. we have been absolutely insane not to develop those. So I understand the level of frustration. First of all, we've handcuffed our good friends in Alberta. The second thing is, and I don't want to oversimplify it because there's more to it. The second thing is of the two major points I just want to mention, and there are other underlying things, is that, they need to be able to develop the resources because we have manufacturing in Ontario that actually feeds into that. If the oil sands are doing well, and we have our manufacturers are doing well because we're selling and providing goods and services to them. And then the second thing is the whole question of equalization. I've heard it over again from my friends. I got many dear friends in Alberta. Like, we should be having a conversation. And the federal government said, we're not even going to have a conversation. So back to Shawn's point is that years ago, we actually screwed you over in terms of your resource development, and then we took all your money. So, like, why wouldn't you be upset? I think it's actually ridiculous that you wouldn't entertain those two questions. Now, there could be other things underlying there, but we've got to make sure they're the economic engine of our country. I love my colleagues from Alberta. I love Albertans. I got family members that live there, but we got to allow them to develop the resources, which in turn is better for all of Canada. And I think to say, over time, we don't want to look at the equalization. That's what we call the redistribution of wealth, right? That's what we call welfare for the federal government, is taking money and giving it to other provinces. And Ontario, by the way, has been on the receiving end of that. Currently, we're not receiving that much, but we have definitely been there over time. So I think if those two issues were addressed, we could bring the temperature down way down, and it's really just being respectful. And I think that I can sense their frustrations. I can understand completely where they're coming from, but my thought is we're much stronger if we have them in the country. But I understand why they're upset.
Well, that's a great answer, Dean. I think it will be appreciated by people on all sides of the argument. We are going to have to look at wrapping it up. As I said to you even before we went to recording, I'm going to give you both the opportunity to say the last and final word. I'm going to start with yourself, Shawn, if I might, first of all, and then we'll cross over to Dean. So, Shawn, the floor is yours.
Okay, so Dean gets to be Mark Anthony, but thankfully we're on the same page. So I want to go back to the Allison Inquiry and really encourage everyone to go to it. It's going to be live broadcast from Parliament Hill on September 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. Put it in your calendars. It doesn't matter what country you're in. This is going to be life-changing. And I promise you, you watch this inquiry, you will never be the same. It'll be like you've stepped through a door and then you look behind you and realize that door's locked and you can't go back to thinking the way you were thinking before. And even though this is going to be held in Canada, I mean, it's in front of our members of Parliament. And they're going to be listening, they're going to be questioning, they're going to be engaging with these people. It's going to change things. And I think it's meant to change things across the world, where all of a sudden doctors don't have to be afraid to have this conversation anymore, where we can, because it's not just Canada where you'll have over half the population believing that this intervention caused harm. So why can't we say, oh, we may have got it wrong? Well, so we have this dialogue. All that's going to happen is we will be divided and weakened. And if we actually do find ourselves in a situation where we legitimately need to have confidence in public health, it's not going to be there in any country. How does that make any of us better off? And, and the skepticism about public health is warranted. And once we have that discussion, we'll understand that and we'll make changes and we'll all be stronger. We'll be united as a polity again. And we will have institutions that serve us again. There is no downside here. But because there are so many people injured and because there are so many people that believe it's caused by the vaccine, no country can avoid this. So it's as uncomfortable as it's going to be for sitting governments, especially those that were in power during COVID, to have this conversation. It can't be avoided. So, I mean, I'm just now speaking to those MPs and government officials around the world. Let's have the conversation now. The sooner the better, because so many are suffering that don't need to be suffering. If we can identify vaccine injury as vaccine injury, there are different protocols, there are different approaches, and we can become proud of how we're treating these people instead of ashamed.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Shawn. I mean, those are very powerful words. I concur with them 100%. And I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of all of that. It sometimes surprises people to know that we are truly an international channel. We're watched by hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, all across North Canada, including Canada, but actually Europe, Australia, New Zealand, all around the world. So that message, that very important words that you put out there, will be seen by a lot of people. And I think a lot of people that watch this show will be very much in support of what you're trying to do. Dean, over to yourself then for the last and final word from yourself as well. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, and so I just want to start off and say, Jim, thanks for having us on today. We really do appreciate an opportunity to talk to some of your viewers, and I hope you come back to Canada soon and we get a chance to see you on our side of the pond. I do make trips over to the UK, so maybe I'll look you up next time I'm over there as well for various parliamentary delegations, etc. Listen, two things I really like to see happen here. I hope this facilitates and starts a conversation, a broader conversation that we can have publicly. Once again, I'll say it. When Shawn came to my office about natural health products back in October, I said, I've got this idea that I need help with. I really think we need to listen to people and to hear the stories. So I want to make sure, and we both agree on this, that we give people permission to publicly, talk about their issues. And I hope that ignites a dialogue that will not stop, that it'll set it on fire in terms of the ability to have conversations. The second thing I hope we can do is recognize that we're not the ones that said these people were vaccine injured. The government itself admitted to that because of a vaccine injury program. They started a program, and according to government numbers, some 60,000 are injured, some 11,000 seriously, 3,500 entered into a program, 3,000 were accepted. Only 252 people out of potentially 60,000, and we know the number's really low, right, because of all the things we talked about for the last hour. 252 people have been compensated. That is 0.4% of the numbers the government admits. So I really hope the government wakes up and comes up with a better program. The program that they had was a third party run by this company called Oxarrow, $55 million, which, by the way, is chump change when we look at the kind of money we spend on climate finance, et cetera, around the world. 55 million, of which 35 went to overhead. Think about that for 1 second. 1/3 of the money they committed went to vaccine injured people. So what I hope happens is that we start a conversation that continues to grow. And as Shawn said, goes around the world. We're going to have this conversation. We'll keep having it so that we can make sure that we do a better job next time. And I really hope that it's not the end, but it's just the beginning of more conversations, longer conversations. But we are only as good as our electorate. Elect people, they make decisions based on that. And if they don't see this as important, then it's kind of hard to see where governments would want to continue. There has been many investigations around the world, good, bad, and different. The UK's done it. The US is doing it. 30 countries, OECD, G7, Commonwealth countries, and we've done nothing in this country. So could we talk about a lot of other things? Oh, yeah, we could. But quite frankly, those are more complicated, longer discussions, more funding required. As Shawn said, this is all going to be privately funded by citizens, right? We're going to provide the space, but we've got to make sure that people get to come and tell their story. So I hope it's the start of conversations that expands and continues to grow around the world. And then I hope we learn from it. We do a better job compensating our individuals, and we can speak to the government and say, hey, the money you've got on the table is not enough, and you've got to start listening to what their concerns are. And then we can do better in the future, either through additional discussions, either through parliamentary committees, through whatever the case may be. But we continue this conversation to make sure this never happens again.
Absolutely agree. I have to want to say, really, I commend you both for the incredible work that you're both doing. And it's deeply encouraging to see, in particular, qualified and professional lawyers from the legal side meeting up and dealing with people who have been elected into Parliament itself. That's a powerful mix, and I absolutely wish you every success with it. We're going to put this out to the general viewing very, very soon. We're going to make sure the links go in, especially to the donate page and to the funding page. But can I just say, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on with me. It's gone past all too quickly. I would definitely love to have you back on again. So please keep in contact, and I can assure you, the next time I'm in Canada, I'll let you know. And likewise, Dean, if you're in the UK, I'm up and down to London a lot. If you come to London, let me know. We'll meet up for a cup of tea or a coffee, whatever you want to do. But let's keep in contact, and please continue the great work that you're both doing. Thank you, gentlemen, indeed, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jim.
You're absolutely my pleasure. And to all the people who are watching this right now, here we have a real powerful combination of truth-seeking that's going on. Having that conversation is incredibly important. So please do share, do like, do follow the work. Go to the Allison Inquiry. Go in and have a look and see for yourselves the great work that's being done. But to each and every one of you, thank you for sharing. Thank you for liking this. And also, I want you to know, you guys that watch this, you're the real stars of this show. And I appreciate each and every one of you. So until next time, this is Jim Ferguson, and we'll speak soon. Bye-bye for now. Hello, everyone. Jim Ferguson here from Freedom Train International. I want to speak to you from the heart because what we do here only exists through your support. Freedom Train International isn't backed by governments, corporations. We are entirely powered by you, ordinary people who care about truth, transparency, and freedom. Every interview, every report, every investigation takes time, travel, and a dedicated global team working behind the scenes. They do it because they believe in what we stand for, and your support keeps them going. You can give as little as $3.77, either as a one-time gift or a monthly donation. Every contribution helps support our international operations, from production and research to outreach and reporting, including the ambassadors working around the world to expose truth in their own nations. Your donation doesn't just fund journalism, it fuels independence. It helps us stay free from censorship, free from control, and free to keep shining the light on what others hide. So if you believe truth still matters, please consider donating today. Together, we're not just reporting the story, we're defending freedom, one voice at a time. I am Jim Ferguson, for Freedom Train International. Thank you for standing with me and with our global Freedom Train International team, working every day to keep truth alive.